Magandang gabi po mga katipon sa Pilipinas. Ito po ang ating Katipunan. Muling sumasa inyo mga tagapakinig upang magbigay ng mahalagang impormasyon, magbigay liwanag at higit sa lahat makinig sa inyong mga daing at kuro-kuro hinggil sa mga problema patuloy na nagpapahirap sa ating kalagayan at kabuhayan. Sa susunod na oras, sisikapin po namin ipaliwanag ang iba-ibang bahagi ng ating ekonomiya at ang mga mabibigat pang local and international issues na may malaking epekto sa ating buhay at kinabukasan. Ito po ang inyong katipon na si Butch Valdes at kasama natin dito ang ating co-host na si Itos Valdes at ang mga kasama din po natin sa Save the Nation Movement, Philippine LaRouche Society, gayon na rin ang Partido Politikal ng Katipunan Demokratikong Pilipino. Kami po ay narito na nag-aanyaya sa inyo makibahagi sa ating talakayan at sa pagsusuri ng mga kasalukuyang problema at paghahanap ng kaukulang solusyon. Okay, ngayong gabi po, sisikapin po namin ilabas.
We'll talk about next week is June 12.
Darating na po yung June 12, na Araw ng Kalayaan. Independence Day.
Independence Day.
At gusto namin sigurong bigyan ng konting pansin ng ang significance, ang importante mga bahagi ng Araw ng Kalayaan. What do we call independence? No? Why do we call it? Why do we assert our sovereignty bilang isang bansa, no? Tsaka isang mga citizens, sovereignty as individuals here in a sovereign nation, no? And so yun ang ating paksa ngayon.
Yes, we'd like to talk about it. Alam mo, dito sa ang ating Katipunan, syempre, very very patriotic tayo. Lahat ng tema natin, lahat ng... But next week is our official celebration next Saturday, official date of our Independence Day. And we were talking this afternoon, ano pa yung magandang paksak na hindi pa dinidiscuss. And there apparently marami. Kasi what does it mean to be independent? Where did that notion come from? Anong mga ideas kung bakit, ano ba independence? What is the responsibilities attached to being independent?
Right.
How we got here historically? All of those things we will attempt to discuss. Now we have some videos.
Bukan natin po, ilalabas po natin ibang video na may kaugnayan, no? Dito sa darating natin na sineselebrate na Araw ng Kalayaan.
Bakit natin sineselebrate?
Because ang nag-uusap kami bakit ba pag ang independence it comes parang naturally, pero we don't really feel it. No? We call ourselves independent kasi may revolution daw tayo para sa demokrasya at ganyan. Pero yung buhay natin, no?
Yes.
Yung buhay natin, sa totoo lang, wala tayong kalayaan, no? Wala tayong kalayaan sa mga importanteng aspeto ng ating buhay.
Are we really free?
Pero okay lang sa atin. Tapos ang papagyabang natin that we are an independent country. No? Alam niyo po, meron, bago natin ituloy ito, no? Meron isang dakilang presidente ng Amerika noon. He singled out. Sabi niya, there are 4 types of freedom. Tayo freedom ng freedom. Tapos, ang 4 types of freedom, sabi niya, 1 is freedom of speech. Malaya ka dapat sabihin kung anong kinakailangan mong sabihin. Na, maski na taliwas ito sa mga sinasabi ng ating gobyerno o sinasabi ng ibang tao, sabihin mo, lalong-lalo na kung yun ang tinitignan mong katotohanan.
Right.
Alam niyo po, if you are one that sticks by the truth, you can be sure you will feel like you are a minority. Parang ikaw lang ang nagsasabi ng ganyan.
Right.
Dahil ang katotohanan po talagang kailangan panindigan nyo. No? So, freedom of speech.
Right, pero and then for freedom of speech po rin, it doesn't mean na just because ito yung pag-iisip mo, kailangan supilin mo ang pag-iisip ng iba na hindi.
Yeah, syempre, that's why it's freedom of speech.
So nobody can stop you from saying what you think.
That's why we demand or we declare a freedom of speech.
Yes.
Diba? Yung isa naman, yung tinatawag na freedom of worship. No? Kinakailangan sa isang lipunan o isang bansa, no? Walang pipigil sa'yo kung paano kang sasamba o mananampalataya sa iyong relihiyon. Kung ano man ang pinili mong relihiyon.
Right.
At yung relihiyon na yan, may rights yan eh. No? Meron kang ginagawa no, na sa iyong pananampalataya. Katulad po ng mga Katoliko, meron silang every Sunday Mass, no? At pupunta sila sa simbahan. Yung pong mga Kristiyano, meron din silang kanilang mga services on certain days. Ang mga Muslim po, nakikita nyo naman po sila, no? Meron din silang kanilang mga ritual na ginagawa. Yung kuminsan nagluluhod sila sa lapag, no? Tapos facing
East.
facing Muhammad, no? Kung saan yung direksyon ni Muhammad. So, and governments, no, must allow this, and people have a right to this, no? Yung freedom of worship, no? Huwag niyong pipigilin yan. Dahil karapatan yan po ng tao. No? Tapos isa pang freedom, yung tinatawag natin na freedom of want, no? O freedom from want. No? Kasi yung want, ito po yung mga pangangailangan. Pangangailangan po ng isang tao sa kanyang lipunan. Pag nasa loob ka ng isang bansa at meron kang gobyerno, yung gobyernong yon dapat nakatutok sa iyong mga pangangailangan. At hindi dapat gagawa ng mga programa o mga polisiya o patakaran na sadyang gugutumin ka. Bawal na bawal yan. No? Yan ang tinatawag ng freedom from want. Hindi sila gagawa ng pamamaraan para magkulang ang iyong pangangailangan para mabuhay.
Basic services, basic
Public utilities, pagkain, healthcare, tapos yan ay karapatan po ng isang mamamayan sa isang lipunan.
Yes.
That's why we have freedom from want.
Yes.
Tapos yung isa, yung pinakahuling importante din, no? Yung freedom from fear. no? Freedom from fear. Itong taong to, siya yung nagsabi pa noon sa kanyang talumpati nung inauguration niya. The only thing to fear is fear itself, sabi niya. Gusto sabihin, ang mga pamahalaan, hindi sila gagawa ng mga patakaran na sadyang pananakot lang. Kakalimutan nila ang pagpapahayag ng katotohanan.
Right.
Kalimutan na nila ang pagpapahayag ng tama para lang makontrol nila ang takbo ng utak ng mga mamamayan. Sadya nilang ilalabas ang mga kasinungalingan para matakot ang mga mamamayan. To instill fear.
Fear from arrest.
Fear from arrest,
Detained.
detention, lahat. No? Maski na mali na, labag na sa saligang batas, at kasinungalingan na ang pagbabasihan ng kanilang pananakot.
Right.
No? Yan ang isang dapat tandaan natin. Freedom from fear. So you have freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. No? And I wanted you to instill this in you before we even open up in the discussion.
Or independence. Because yung nagbigay ng speech na yon, tinatawag na For Freedom speech, ay walang iba kundi si US President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. In 1932 po, he was elected into office right after the Great Depression po ng US. So and then in 1936, yun yata yung four freedoms niya. Or later on. But he rebuilt,
No, 33.
he rebuilt the US from the Great Depression and before war. And he wanted to tell his people, dapat ito yung ng gobyerno ko, ito yung ng administrasyon ko. Dapat you have freedom from fear, freedom from want, freedom for worship, and freedom of speech. So lahat yan daw yung gagawin niya for his administration. And that's why gustong-gusto siya ng tao. And until now, nakikita po niyo sa Amerika, lahat ng tao gustong-gusto ng freedom. No government official can tell them what to do. They are, and that is based on their constitution. And that is based on the culture and the principles of the U.S. Declaration of Independence. Remember po, na-discuss na po natin yan. The Declaration of Independence against Britain.
Hindi ibig sabihin na ang mga tao sa Estados Unidos ay free from these things as well. Meron din mga tao ngayon sa gobyerno na gumagawa ng kasinungalingan para pilitin ang mga mamayan ng Amerikano gawin ang gusto nilang mangyari. Sa bawat bansa at kanilang mga pamahalaan, no? Kanya-kanya lang pag-iisip kung paano lang kukontrolin ng tao, no? Dahil ang tao po may sariling pag-iisip. Maski na gusto natin order, gusto natin na magkaroon ng magandang kabuhayan at alam natin kung ano yung mga batas na kinakailangan sundan, no? Pero kuminsan itong mga ito sa nasa gobyerno, hindi pa sapat yan. At ang mga nasa pamahalaan kaysa nasa Estados Unidos ngayon, o sa Pilipinas, o sa Italy, o sa France, o sa anywhere, no? Palaging nagkakaroon ng iba-ibang mga pamamaraan para pasundan ang mga mamamayan sa kanilang kagustuhan. No? This is something that I think we should always
Watch out.
watch out for,
Yeah.
because this is something continuous.
Mm.
But the human beings that we are, no, understand that we are sovereign human beings.
Mm.
Tayo ay people, no, born, no,
Mm.
with innate, inherent powers, no, the inherent rights,
Mm.
right to life, right to liberty, ito pong freedom, and the pursuit of happiness. Yan po yung importante natin dapat isipin.
Yeah. And in all peoples po yan. Remember po yan, yung passage na yan, galing sa US Declaration of Independence. Which is different from yung sinasabi natin ibang klaseng gobyerno. Remember po, imperialist empire, British colony, tayo under Spain. Wala pong rights ang karaniwang tao, ordinary man and women. And then you had in the Declaration of Independence, that started the nation of the United States. When FDR put out the Four Freedom speech, it was in 1941.
Mm.
And he put it out kasi sabi niya, okay, we've rebuilt the America and we will now say, look, everybody is entitled to its prosperity. Huwag kayong matakot, huwag kayong mangamba. And that was his State of the Nation Union speech in 1941. Pero bago nag-atake in December in Pearl Harbor. Okay, so bago siya napapadpad sa World War II. But we wanted to also show a video kasi June 12, 1946, di ba? Ang independence natin na binigay sa atin. Remember po, we were under Spain, tapos we were under the United States for a while. In 1930, when Franklin Roosevelt took over 1933, there was a move already to be, let us be independent. And in 1935-36, medyo igagrant na yon until pumasok tong threat of World War. Kasi si Japan was starting to militarize. And then, so we wanted to show you, I think it's ano ba yung video natin, Roxanne? Ito yung 1947 Philippine History and Independence. Yung mas mahaba, 1947. Okay. This is a Time magazine feature. Parang report nila on when the Philippines was given independence in 1946. So maganda po to. I mean, it's nice to know for our information. And then we can discuss some of the details. Sige.
Far across the Pacific, almost 7 miles from the United States, are the Philippines, a group of 7,091 islands which make up the new independent Philippine Republic. Of all the countries invaded by the Axis powers in World War II, few were more complete. As peace came to their ruined cities and farms, the Filipinos, with the independence the U.S. had promised them only a year away, found they had little left with which to begin life as a nation. The 43 different racial groups with no common culture or tradition, the Philippines became a Spanish possession following their discovery by Magellan in 1521. Entirely dominated by their Spanish rulers, the Filipino people in 3 centuries made little economic or political progress. After Admiral George Dewey's victory at Manila Bay in 1898, Spain was forced to cede the Philippines to the United States. Implacably opposed to American occupation of the Philippines was General Emilio Aguinaldo, who for 2 years up to 1901 was the leader of revolt against U.S. government in the islands, and who never became reconciled to the presence of American troops. But as the benevolence of U.S. rule won recognition and American ideas of democracy were introduced into the Philippines, an orderly and peaceful campaign for self-government began. Staunchest champion of the Philippine independence movement for over a quarter of a century was the late Manuel Luis Quezon, who by 1934 had secured from the U.S. a Commonwealth status for the Philippines and the promise of complete freedom by 1946. For his services in the struggle for independence, grateful Filipinos in 1935 elected Manuel Quezon as first president of their new Commonwealth. By the time President Quezon assumed office, the Philippines, under U.S. rule, had achieved a degree of progress and prosperity unmatched among any of the dependent peoples of the Far East. But this prosperity was not widely distributed, and the living standard of the masses of Filipinos was high only in comparison with the rest of the Orient. Mainstay of Philippine economy was agriculture, with rice as the one big food crop. The island's farms were largely held by big landowners, for whom millions of poorly paid Filipinos worked in lifelong peonage. Few of these were able to acquire land of their own, though 3/4 of the island's arable soil lay idle. Of the few exportable crops on which Philippine prosperity depended, most important was cane sugar, of which the Philippines produced over 1 million tons a year, exporting almost 2/3 of it to the United States. Another major source of income in the islands was the growing of abaca and its processing into Manila hemp. A strong fiber found only in the Philippines, hemp is converted into a rope of outstanding quality in demand throughout the world. Included among the island's great mineral resources of still undetermined extent are immense deposits of chromite, which were found less than 20 years ago, and huge veins of gold discovered on the island of Luzon. Among the richest in the world, these mines are capable of producing as much as 1 million fine ounces of gold each year. But all these industries brought benefits chiefly to a few shrewd investors who formed a small ownership class. Between this group and the great masses of Philippine people, there existed almost no middle class. In pre-war times, foreigners controlled many of the biggest Philippine industries. And the economy of the islands, based almost entirely upon trade with the U.S., depended chiefly upon tariff concessions which gave Philippine products a favored position in American markets. During the 4 decades of American rule, more money was spent on public health and education than on any other function of government. An almost universal illiteracy was greatly reduced through the establishment in every village and town of at least one primary school, with much of the teaching modeled after U.S. methods of progressive education. To send a son or a daughter to the University of the Philippines, Filipinos were willing to make tremendous sacrifices. For the ambition of most families was to have at least one girl or boy graduate into some respected business or profession. Until Philippine independence would finally take effect, defense of the islands rested upon the U.S. fleet units based at Cavite in Manila Bay and upon the U.S. Air Forces assembled and maintained in the Philippines. But Filipinos knew that from the day their freedom became an accomplished fact, the responsibility for national defense might well be theirs. General Douglas MacArthur, who with Major Dwight Eisenhower as his assistant commanded American forces in the Philippines, was the man President Quezon chose to head the new Philippine military establishment. MacArthur set out on a program by which he hoped, within 10 years, to have a trained army of 300,000, capable of holding off any threatened invasion. But before MacArthur's military program was half completed, war struck the Philippines. Within 5 months, Japan overwhelmed the few thousand ill-equipped American and Filipino troops defending the islands. And in place of the Americans, who had governed with justice and who promised freedom, came the Japanese, who governed by the sword and offered nothing but slavery. Of all the dependent peoples of Asia, the common people of the Philippines alone united to resist the conqueror. All over the islands, behind Japanese lines, guerrilla armies sprang up. Filipinos of many races, religions, and dialects forgot their differences. With whatever weapons were at hand, plus what could be smuggled in, the Filipino guerrillas fought the Japanese for 3 hard years. Many American Army officers who had avoided capture were among their leaders. To these, the Filipino guerrillas funneled military information which proved invaluable to U.S. operations in the Pacific. With the triumphant return of MacArthur, backed by powerful armies and an immense supply organization, the U.S. put to full use the fighting effectiveness of the island's guerrillas. Outfitted with American weapons and equipment, they joined forces with MacArthur's men in the final hard-fought campaign to wipe out the Japanese. Within 9 months of the first landing on Leyte, U.S. forces had virtually completed the liberation of the island. Everywhere, the Americans were greeted as saviors by a grateful people. To the Filipinos, this was the vindication of their faith in the United States and in their hero, General Douglas MacArthur. After 3 long years of slavery, the Philippine people could once again live in freedom. And to their American allies, beside whom they had fought so valiantly, they looked hopefully for aid in peace as they had in war. As they faced the gigantic task of rehabilitation, the Filipinos had ample need of the stoicism and courage they had shown under occupation. With supplies drastically depleted, food allowances had to be restricted to the barest minimum, and the hunt for enough nourishment to keep alive became an endless preoccupation of city dwellers. To start the monumental task of reconstruction, as well as to create employment, the Philippine government set out, with the help of the U.S. Army, to enroll available workers in a temporary labor pool. Thousands of men signed up for an intensive course of training in American Army engineering methods and were employed all over the islands, clearing the debris of war to make way for the establishments of peace. In Manila Harbor, laborious salvage operations were begun to recover for the Philippine government $8.5 million worth of coins, all the silver in the island's pre-war treasury, which had been dumped into the bay early in the war to prevent its falling into Japanese hands. For months, Army and Navy divers worked in 20 fathoms of water to reclaim the treasure, which had lain there since before the fall of Corregidor. first step in reorganizing the financial life of the islands was to restore banking facilities and make possible the ordinary business transactions of peacetime. For until Philippine commerce and industry could be reestablished, there would be no adequate source of tax revenues with which to finance rehabilitation. The need for money and construction materials was immediate and urgent, and for these, there was only one place to turn, the United States. Recognizing this fact, the U.S. sent to Manila a mission headed by Senator Millard E. Tidings to determine the extent of the assistance the Philippines would need. On the recommendation of the Tidings report, the U.S. in 1946 granted President Sergio Osmeño's government over $500 million for reconstruction, plus special tariff and trade privileges to last for 28 years. Though the path ahead is still a thorny one, the people of the Philippines have at least gained from the war a new regard for democracy and are today politically alive and active. Proud of the part they played in liberation, newly conscious of their collective power, the ordinary people of the islands are demanding a bigger stake in the future of the country for which they fought. Voting for a president to lead their infant republic through its first 4 critical years of independence, the Philippine people chose Manuel Acuña Rojas, long the leader of the Insular Senate. A skilled and experienced politician, Manuel Rojas is an able economist as well. With freedom at last, and with the sorely needed financial and economic assistance of the U.S. already theirs, the 18 million citizens of the Philippines are today setting out on the high road of independence. Aware as never before of their national identity, they are determined to make for themselves a respected place in the family of free and independent nations.
Okay, baka nagustuhan niyo po yung konting historical account dito sa atin para towards our being granted independence by the US. First and foremost, dapat yung malaman nyo, yung nakita ninyong clip na yan is part of what we call American propaganda. Ang bida dyan, syempre, ang mga Amerikano, no? Pero totoo that we were granted independence by the United States. Dahil dati po, since 1901, no, hanggang 1946, we were a colony of the United States. Nung nakita yung eleksyon ni Manuel L. Quezon, no, 1935 ba yun or something, no? That was the first Philippine Commonwealth, meaning it was like a step towards moving towards independence. No? At habang dinedevelop po tayo nun, tinutulungan tayo ng Estados Unidos. Maganda naman ng tulong kasi ang presidente nun si Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Right? At katulad nung sinabi nila, ang bansang Pilipinas daw, nung panahon na yon, makikita mo, angat na angat dito sa mga ibang karatig bansa ng Southeast Asia. Dahil dati, yung mga ibang bansa, ang may hawak sa kanila, ang mga British, no?
British,
French, Dutch, mga colonies sila. Pero tayo lang ang bukod-tanging American colony. At sinisigurado dati ni Franklin Roosevelt na ipakita sa buong mundo, iba ang pag naging colony ka ng Amerika, iba ang magiging direksyon ng bansa ninyo papunta sa kaunlaran. Kanya lang, inabutan po tayo ng gera. No? Siguro mas maaga pa sana ang ating granting of independence, no? Pero nung inabutan po tayo ng gera, hindi po pwedeng wala pa tayong kakayanan pigilin ang mga Hapon, no? At siyempre andito ang bansang Amerika, ang mga base militar nila. So nasama tayo dito sa gera ng World War II. No? Malamang kung wala din yung Amerika, sasakupin din tayo ng Hapon. And in a way, nasakop tayo ng Hapon ng mga tatlong taon, katulad nung sinasabi dun sa kasaysayan, dahil paalis nila muna yung Amerikano. No? Tsaka lang bumalik si Douglas MacArthur nung medyo nakahanda na siya sa mga armas at mga kakailanganin ano sa Hapon, no? Pero these were very important times dahil pagkatapos po ng gera, nakita niyo po yung sabi, devastated yung Pilipinas. At maski nag-grant tayo ng independence, wala tayong kakayanan mabuhay. Na? At kinailangan pa rin natin ang tulong ng Amerikano para paandarin yung ating ekonomiya. At pinautang po tayo niyan. No? At yung utang na sa ating magkaroon tayo ng ekonomiya, di ko alam exactly magkano, pero sinabi doon, 500 million to be paid within something like 26 years
28.
or 28 years.
That would have been 1974.
Okay. So that was the case.
That was the arrangement.
Pero yung sinasabi ng tidings doon, na rin nakita niyo si tidings kausap si Osmeña,
Right.
na doon nag-umpisa yung tinatawag na Tidings-McDuffie Law, na ang sinasabi, ito hindi sinasabi doon sa reel na napanood natin, kasi ang bida doon syempre Amerikano, di ba?
Yeah.
Pero ang sinasabi doon, papautangin namin kayo ng 28 years, $500 million dollars na. Pero kami ang most favored nation. US will have special trading rights with the Philippines.
Right.
They will have first option on our goods. They will have, wala na, parang kontrolado pa rin ang ekonomiya natin ng bansang Amerika. At nung panahon na yon, syempre, wala siguro tayong kakayanan magsarili.
Wala talaga. Wala talaga.
Forced to good tayo at
Right.
umokay na din tayo.
Yes.
Pero ang importante dito, sinasabi natin, binibigyan tayo ng kalayaan, no? Pero hindi tunay na kalayaan.
Yeah.
Na yan pong ang Independence Day natin noon ay ilinagay pa sa July 4.
Yan ang gusto ng Amerikano.
Kasi ang Independence Day nila July 4.
Right.
No?
Right.
So pero nung panahon ni Macapagal, no, lilipat natin sa June 12
Yes.
yung sa
Official.
Cavite,
Yeah.
yung ating
Try Kawit.
sa Kawit, Cavite, nung nag-declare tayo ng independence in 1899, no, sa Espanya, no. Yun po ang ating
So yun ang naging official date ng independence. I wanted to add lang, marami kasi syempre yung buong mundo nasa gera at the time, and the US was kumbaga siya yung paglabas ng World War II, siya lang yung nag-iisang superpower sa mundo. Okay? And we had, as Philippines, because of our relationship with the United States at that time, we had the opportunity to that the US at that time decided to grant us. Ngayon, when we look back po at the Tidings-McDuffie Agreement, medyo sabihin natin lugi tayo. But also, if you look at that and looking at this video, makikita niyo wala naman tayong choice eh. Kasi nasira na yung buong bansa sa World War II. Okay? And ang US, ang pinakamalaki, they had the most to offer and willing to offer. So, there are two sides to that. Ang nangyari after the Tidings-McDuffie Act was not in effect anymore. Yun yung dapat ano natin. Kasi we had now the freedom to choose and make another economic arrangement na mas pabor sa atin. Looking back, also, na-mention ni Chairman na, remember po, under Spain, most of the islands were under European powers. Lahat yan, empire. Diba, nag-discuss na po tayo, yung kings and queens, royal families, gano'n. Indonesia was Dutch, Malaysia was British, Vietnam, that area was France. And we were under Spain. Ito po yung mga powers of empire in the 16th, 17th, 18th centuries. Noong nag-19th century or 20th century, palapit na sa 20th, lumalakas na tong United States. And United States was an independent republic. It was not a empire. It was not a royal family. Remember po, 1776 to centuries before, it had kicked out the British. Correct? Because gusto nilang maging independence. Life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. Nung they took over the Philippine Islands after Spain, pati sa kongreso nila, ang daming issue. Kasi sabi nila, hindi naman tayo colonizer. Ba't tayo mananatili dyan? Hindi naman tayo dapat nandyan. So pati doon sa United States, maraming debate dyan sa kongreso. May mga iba na strategic yan. We have to keep those islands kasi itong yung mga ibang Congress and Senate, ayaw nila. Sabi nila, bitawan niyo yan, bigyan niyo na sila, bahala na sila. Give them. So, it was under McKinley's watch. Naalala niyo po si William McKinley. And kanyang famous, which our historians always write in their books, is The White Man's Burden. And considering them na parang sabi niya, napunta sa atin yung Pilipinas, okay, by whatever fate of history, we have to show, let us try and make an example of them, not as a colony. Kasi po, yung colonies po, economics of a colony is to take away everything from that colony and not give anything back. What happened after in 1900 to 1930s, pwede na tayo mag-independence kasi binild up nila yung kakayahan ng Pilipinas. That's why they were saying, and it's not untrue, na talagang tinulungan tayo. We were educated. Ang empire po, hindi po nag-educate, parang sa Spanya. Hindi tayo na-educate, hindi tayo binibigyan ng opportunity. But under the United States, we were given all of that and preparing for independence.
Yeah, yung kaninang sinabi ko, yung Tidings-McDuffie was actually that.
Yes.
Because that was, at the time, 1935 tayo nagkaroon ng Constitution, di ba?
Right.
Yung 1934, nagkaroon sila ng desisyon sa Amerika na hindi nila permanenteng hahawakan ng Pilipinas.
Right.
So they wanted a process of moving the country towards real independence. So 1934, gumawa sila ng itong Tidings-McDuffie Law. Tapos sinabi nila dito na mayroong 10-year period na proseso so that 10 years after, by 1944, meron tayong independence. No? Yun ang intention. Ngayon, pagdating ng 1944, may gera po tayo.
Yes.
No? Nagkaroon po ng gera even before that.
Yeah.
Bombing of Pearl Harbor, 1941, no? So on so forth. No? So hindi na agad-agad na tupad itong pagbibigay sa atin ng independence kasi gera no? So, pero pagkatapos po ng gera, itinuloy po nila yan. Namatay itong si Franklin Roosevelt. Pero tapos nagkaroon sila ulit ng discussion. Pumasok naman itong tinatawag na Bell Trade Act.
Yes.
Yung Bell Trade Act po, ang presidente natin noon ay si Rojas na.
Yes.
Presidente Manuel Rojas. At siya ang pumayag na ang
With Truman.
dahil si Truman,
Yes.
wala na si
Roosevelt.
siya ang pumayag na ang Pilipinas ay hindi talagang magiging
Well,
independent.
Yes.
Dahil yung Belt Trade Act, ang sinasabi nga, Amerika ang
Favored
ang-
nation status.
favored nation,
Yeah.
at sila ang may hawak halos ng buong ekonomiya
Right.
ng Pilipinas.
Tutulungan namin kayo, pero tulungan nyo kami. Kami lang
Oo.
yung partner nyo. Tapos, kung makikipag-usap kayo sa ibang bansa, kailangan dumaan sa amin. Ganon yung mga patakaran. So that's what happened. So I was going to say nga, leading up to after World War II, namatay na po si Roosevelt. Si Roosevelt po, during 1933 po, nandun na tayo, SSS, nilagay na dito, na-establish yung NAPOCOR natin, na-establish yung... Roosevelt was preparing the Philippines for independence. That is unprecedented. Wala pong colonizer ang nagganyan ever in the history. Yung British, yung French, yung Dutch, they will not give it freely. You have to fight for it. Eh yun na nga, when the US had the Philippines, maraming away din within the US, si Mark Twain, di ba? Ayaw na ayaw niya kasi hindi naman tayo colonist, di ba? Life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, bigay na natin, di ba? So, that was the conflict. And then they said, sige. So, may period yan na 10 years. And nagkagera, alam na po natin, then after, namatay na si Roosevelt, iba na yung pumasok. Hindi na ganun ka friendly sa ibang bansa.
Si President Truman po,
Yes.
yung pumalit kay Roosevelt,
Right.
ay isa sa mga nagpahirap na presidente ng Amerika sa atin. Kanya po nag-iba ang tingin po ng mga Pilipino
May Truman
sa Amerika.
Okay.
Kasi yung tatandaan niyo po, nagkaroon ng gera. Tapos, sakop po tayo ng Amerikano because we were still a colony of America. So our soldiers were fighting the Japanese, not just for our country, but also for America.
Yes.
And we were fighting side by side with American soldiers.
Right.
At ipinangako ni President Roosevelt na pagkatapos ng gera, ang mga benefits, war benefits and pay, veterans pay, na maibibigay sa sundalong Amerikano noon, ay siya ring mabibigay sa sundalong Pilipino noon.
Yan si Roosevelt.
Yan to si Roosevelt. Pagdating po ni Truman, hindi niya pinatupad.
Wala na.
No. Tapos, pinahirapan niya ang paghihingi ng veterans pay.
Right.
Hanggang ngayon po, yung mga apo ng mga sundalo na lumaban ng panahon na yon ay nakaabang pa rin para
Yes.
mabigyan ng kanilang veterans pay.
Right.
No?
Right. So that's one of the tragedies nga. Kasi nga kaya nga sabi sa kami dito, had Roosevelt lived just a little bit longer, makikita po iba yung takbo. Maaring mapapunta pa tayo kasi anyway, namatay si Roosevelt. Pero nung buhay pa si Roosevelt, kung buhay pa si Roosevelt, we would not have to deal with certain things in history that we had to deal with. So,
But yun ang nangyari, itong kasaysayan. No?
and we know this in hindsight, di ba? Alam na nakita po namin. But we have to highlight these things kasi 20th century na to. On the other end also, remember po yung bombing ng Pearl Harbor. Japan po was yung mindset remember, Japan was taken over by military forces in the 1920s, early 20s. Okay? They already attacked Russia. They already destroyed the Russian fleet. They attacked China. And they were gearing for war. Itong Japan was supported by the British Empire at the time. And it had ambitions sa mga propaganda nila, sa mga manunulat nila, to take over Asia. Okay? And when they bombed Pearl Harbor, hindi po alam ng nasa history books natin masyado. Pero nandyan, kung hukayin nyo po today, they bombed first the air bases here in the Philippines. Because ang gusto nila mangyari, hindi makarespond ang United States. Dito tayo sa Pacific. Okay, so they bombed first all of the fleet, the Air Force. It was in Sangli. I don't know if Sangli or Clark Air Base. Clark Air Base. Binomba po nila, surprise attack. Tapos may attack sila sa Pearl Harbor. So alam nila kung paano maglaro. And they wanted to invade. And they tried to get. Remember po, one of their collaborators, right? When Japan took over the Philippines, none other than Benigno Aquino Sr. Yung tatay po, right? Ni Benigno Aquino Jr., yung grandfather po ni Noynoy. Okay? He turned traitor. Naging traitor po siya sa bayan during the Japanese occupation. Siya yung tapos nagpatayo pa siya ng political party, siya yung head ng political party na sumusuporta sa occupation ng Japan.
Ng Hapon.
That's Benigno Aquino Sr. Tapos,
Anyway, pagkatapos ng gera, tumakbo si Benigno Aquino Sr. sa Japan. Tapos
sumama siya.
Nahanap siya doon ng mga US Armed Forces at ibinalik siya dito sa Pilipinas para to stand trial for treason. At bago siya masakdal, no, ay na-atake siya, no? He got a heart attack and died, no? So wala nang nangyari doon, no?
But that's the
Ito yung konting kasaysayan natin na siguro dapat malaman na siyempre marami pang maibang mga issues dyan, pero napaka-importante. Ito po yung ating road towards independence.
But I wanted to raise also Pedro Abad Santos during that time.
Okay.
Meron ba tayong Pedro Abad Santos? Pasensya na po kasi relative po namin si Pedro Abad Santos at napaka-proud po kami na during at that time, si Pedro Abad Santos was a real patriot.
Isa po siya sa mga nagtayo ng hukbo laban sa Hapon. No? Dahil ayaw niya, isa siyang farmer sa Central Luzon, sa Pampanga, si Pedro Abad Santos. Siya po yung lolo ko, great-grandfather. Okay.
Correct.
Niyan po, ayaw
Kamukha ba namin? Hindi.
ayaw niya yung nahawakan po tayo ng dayuhan. Kasi po nung batang-bata po siya, he was not even 10 years old. His father, my great-grandfather, was one of those part of the military of Andres Bonifacio. And he was caught by the Spanish soldier somewhere in San Fernando, Pampanga, and was dragged by horse. No?
Kinali po siya tapos sa kabayo.
Kinaladkad po siya hanggang Bacolod, Pampanga, kung saan po nakaabang yung kanyang anak, itong si Pedro Abad Santos, at namatay sa kanyang kamay.
In front of him.
Ang kanyang hawak-hawak niya, namatay yung...
Ito naman si Pedro.
Hindi, yan si
Jose, sorry.
Yan si Jose Abad Santos naman.
Yeah. Who were related to also.
Yes, kapatid yan ni Pedro Abad Santos.
Yeah.
Siya po yung Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, who was then acting head of the Philippines.
Yeah.
Kasi po wala si Manuel L.
He
Quezon.
had to leave.
Wala din yung Vice President, no? At ang naiwan dito, yung next in line was the Chief Justice.
Right.
Nag-occupy na po yung mga Hapon.
Mm.
At they were rounding up all of these government officials.
Mm.
So, and the Chief Justice was then third in line
Mm.
in being the
Succession.
succession.
Mm.
So they were looking for him and hunting for him, and they found him. And they asked him to pledge allegiance to Japan, no?
Mm.
To the Japanese government and to the Japanese flag.
Right.
And he said he was not going to do that.
Mm.
No? He was a proud Filipino and will live by that principle.
Yes.
And so they took him down and from the house and shot him.
Mm.
There was a three
Firing squad. Mm.
But before, on his way down, his son was crying,
Mm.
and he told his son, "Do not cry, because it is not. It is
Very
not
few
the same
people.
privilege given to so many people to die for their country."
Mm.
So those are his last words.
Mm.
Anyway, right now, being an obvious hero, no,
Yeah.
his statue
Mm.
is in the entrance of the Supreme Court building here in Manila.
Right.
And I'm sorry to bring this up, no, because
Bakit?
because well,
Independence Day.
Oo.
Ito po. Ito
ito po yung mga lumalaban
Oo.
para sa ating kasarilan,
Yes.
no. Ayaw ng dayuhan yung kapares ni Pedro Abad Santos.
Mm.
Ang buhay na talagang ginamit niya pang laban sa mga dayuhan.
Yes.
Ang kanyang ama lumalaban sa mga Kastila at siya lumalaban din sa mga Amerikano,
Mm.
lalong-lalo na nung lumalaban na rin siya sa mga Hapon,
Mm.
no?
Mm.
At siya pa ang ang protege niya,
Mm.
ang parang training niya para mag-succeed sa kanya sa paglalaban sa Hapon, itong si
Luis.
Luis Taruc. No? Ewan ko kung narinig nyo na yung pangalan niya.
Gandang
Si
story rin yan.
Luis Taruc. No? At meron silang kilusan, ang pangalan nun, Hukbo Laban sa Hapon.
Palahat.
Hukbalahap. No?
Mm.
At they were guerrillas. 3 taon po wala dito yung mga Amerikano. So sila nandun sa kabundukan at kung sa mga liblib na lugar, no? Lumalaban sila sa mga Hapon. Kung minsan po, itak lang daw ang hawak nila.
Mm.
No? Kasi wala silang makuwang mga armas. No? At
Picture that.
pinupulot lang nila itong mga armas para makuha yan. No?
Yeah,
Yun po.
it's syempre, yung chairman, syempre ako, proud na proud po ako na may dugo kaming, patriotiko. Aside from the KDP, talagang literally may dugo po kaming patriotiko, and I wanted to emphasize that because, look, you have a, bakit ang tao parating nagnanais ng freedom? Why can't they just sit and say, enjoy na lang tayo sa buhay natin, magtrabaho na lang tayo kahit under Spain, under the US, under Japan? Saan po galing yan? Saan po galing yung pagnanais na may sariling bansa, na may sariling sovereign nation state that you can call your own? And that you can determine kung saan tayo pupunta as a country, as a people, and as a history. And we wanted to emphasize that. Saan ba galing yan? What is the kind of thinking? Usap na tayo, discussion na tayo about the Declaration of Independence in the United States. Why are people fighting for freedom? Where does it come from? What is the philosophy? What are the principles? Bakit pa? wag na lang, maging ano na lang tayo, may narinig pa nga ako, sana colony na lang tayo ng United States para guminhawa ang buhay natin. Sayang yung Japan, kasi kung nasa under Japan tayo, para na tayong Japan. Does it work that way? Diba?
No, it doesn't, of course.
Right.
No.
So bakit
But
ba?
all throughout the history of man,
Right.
no, man always had to fight for his freedom. No? Because all the time, man was trying to control man. No? Yung mga yung may hawak ng poder at yung mga may hawak ng kayamanan, no? Gusto nilang kontrolado nila yung mga nakakarami, no? At para makuha nila yung kanilang kagustuhan. Now, ganito ang sitwasyon, ang tao hindi naman po hayop. Kung hayop yan, kaya mong hawakan yan eh, no? Parang mga baka, no? Sunod-sunuran lang yan. Parang mga tupa, no? Sunod-sunuran lang yan. Dahil minsan magagamit mo pa yung aso para dalhin sila sa kulungan, di ba po? Pero ang tao po, hindi. Siguro kung minsan magagawa mo yon, pero hindi matagal mong magagawa. Lalaban at lalaban dahil likas po sa ating pagkatao, no? Ang freedom, no? Kalayaan. We cannot, by nature po, nature na natin yan. Ang nature natin po, we are sovereign, we are free. Ganyan po tayo nila lang. Tapos pag meron hahawak sa atin, pipigilin tayo. Pipigilin tayong mabuhay. Pipigilin tayong kumain ng sapat. Pipigilin tayong magsalita dito sa ating naiisip. Yan po ay labag sa ating likas na soberenya. Our sovereign nature. We are sovereign individuals. Ganyan pa tayo nila lang. So, kung meron isang estado, ang tawag nila dito sa estadong ito ay sovereign republic, no? Yung sovereign republic comes from the members of that republic who are sovereign. That's why ang tawag natin dito, sovereignty emanates from the people. No? Dahil po yung tao, kung yung citizens mo puro chongo, you cannot call it a sovereign republic because a chongo is not sovereign. But human beings are. No? That is where the idea of sovereignty comes from.
Right.
And that's why we people, we establish a government. And this government is supposed to address, is told to address our needs and see to it that we are free. It must protect our freedom.
Four freedoms.
Yung four freedoms po, freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want, and freedom from fear.
Yes.
Yang gobyernong yan ang kanilang katungkulan.
Yes.
At tayo ang nagtatatag dyan. Kuminsan, yun nga, by election, dito sa ating sistema, no? Tapos, pero merong katungkulan yan. Pag hindi nila ginawa ang kanilang katungkulan na gawin ito para sa taong gumawa sa ganyang gobyerno,
Right.
katungkulan po ng tao. Karapatan po natin. Palitan yung gobyernong yan.
It's our duty.
It is our duty and it is our right,
Yes.
no, to change that government.
Yes.
We must understand why it is so important when we say our day, kalayaan, ng araw ng kalayaan.
Yes.
No? Araw ng kalayaan po, maski na ibinigay natin at ginawa tayong malayang bansa, nung 1946 at lahat-lahat.
May technical.
Pero lahat yun, no, ang prinsipyo na nanggagaling sa kalayaan ng bawat individual sa ating bansa. Likas. Silang, no? Pagkasilang lang ng isang sanggol na Pilipino, no? Ano na siya, taglay na niya itong mga karapatan na ito. This right to life, liberty, no? And the pursuit of happiness. Ito po ang importante malaman natin. At kung ano ang gobyerno.
Yeah.
Hindi yung gobyerno aalipinin ng tao at yung kagustuhan ng gobyerno ipopuwersa niya sa tao. Hindi po ganyan. Yung tao po ang merong dapat karapatan at kapangyarihan sabihin sa gobyerno kung ano ang gusto natin. Pero kung minsan, ang ating mga mamamayan, medyo naguguluhan at hindi na nila alam. At kung nanaisin ng mga nasa gobyerno na gagawin tayong parang mga baka na ilinalagay sa koral at papunta dito sa slaughterhouse, sa katayan, no? Dahil yun ang sinabi ng ating pamahalaan, papatayin namin kayo kasi yan ang yan ang patakaran natin. Hindi sila umaangal. Ayaw nilang gamitin yung taglay nilang pag-iisip na lalaban tayo sa mga patakaran na labag sa kalayaan. We have to understand this. That is why we celebrate Araw ng Kalayaan, the Day of Independence, not just as a republic, because that republic will not be independent if the individual members of that country, of that republic, are not independent. We are sovereign. And that sovereignty is the basis for the sovereignty of our nation state. We must internalize this. And every government is mandated by the Filipino people, by its people, to follow what the people want. And it cannot be the other way around. There are certain things that need to be implemented in accordance with reasonable law. Law that then be instituted, no, based on natural law. Yung batas na ginagawa natin para sa taong bayan ay hindi labag sa natural law. Ang natural law po, yung nangingibabaw na batas na sa ating by our Creator, the Creator of the whole universe. Yan po, meron siyang natural law. Yung law po, yung batas na gagawin natin para sa tao at ang ating saligang batas ay hindi lumalabag sa natural law. Diyan po nang gagaling ang ating konsepto ng soberenya. Tapos iloob natin sa ating puso at sa ating pag-iisip that we have that right and the duty to tell the government what we need and what we want. And if they refuse, that right and duty extends to replacing them. And this coming Independence Day, Saturday, this coming Saturday, we are a coalition of many different organizations. Some want federalization. Some want independence from the United States control. Some don't want the intrusion of China into our Philippine seas. Some are angry at the poverty that is induced by government rules. Itong mga shutdown ng mga businesses. Some are angry at the mandatory nature of the inoculation of vaccines. Some are angry at the lies that Department of Health, Department of Education, and even Malacanang that are pushing so that the people are misled and misguided. Some are angry at the mainstream media for participating in confusing the people and withdrawing the truth. Some are angry at the judicial system because of the corruption of the judiciary from the bottom all the way to the top. Some are angry at many are angry at our legislature because the senators and the congressmen, most of them are corrupt. And that they are corrupted by corporatism, the oligarchs that are in partnership with the top members of our government. Some are really angry that the public utilities are controlled by a handful of family corporations, just maybe 10 of them, controlling all the public utilities, earning trillions and trillions of pesos, imposing among the highest electricity rates in the world and water rates and telecom rates on our people, with the conspiracy of government officials. All of these organizations will get together on June 12 and bring out lahat po ng kanilang karahingan. Ilalabas po nila. At sasabihin po nila, kung hindi nakakayanin ng ating namamahala itong mga problemang napakabigat para sa isang tao, kung hindi niya kakayanin lupigin ang problema sa droga na laganap hanggang ngayon, problema sa mga NPA, bagamat nababawasan, sige pa rin ang kanilang paglalaban at pumapatay pa rin ng mga mamamayan natin because they are extortionists. Itong mga NPA na extortion groups, binibigyan sila ng pera ng mga oligarko hanggang 500 million pesos a year. Parang protection racket. At yan ay sinisingil nila sa mga consumers. Ganyan po ang ating sitwasyon ngayon. At kung hindi kakayanin ng liderato natin ngayon, Ang hinihingi po nitong mga grupo na koalisyon na ito, ang hinihingi po nila na ang ating sandatahang lakas at ang ating mga kapulisan at ang ating presidente na halal ay gumawa na ng hakbang para i-take over ang ating gobyerno, para agad-agad maayos, malutasan ang lahat ng hinaharap natin na nagpapahirap sa buhay ng mga mamamayang Pilipino. Importante po itong panawagan na ito. Hindi po tayo isang kilusan na nagsasabi patalsikin ang ating Pangulo. Hindi po natin pwedeng gawin yan kasi siya po ay halal ng mamamayang Pilipino. At ang sinabi natin nung hinalal natin yan, 6 na taon siyang magpre-preside as president. Ngunit itong 5 taon, nasabayan pa ng COVID at walang ginagawang paglulutas sa kahirapan ng tao, ang konklusyon pa ng mamamayan ay hindi niya kakayanin mag-isa. At ang sinasabi po natin, Mr. President, pwede ba tumabi ka lang muna at allow the armed forces of the Philippines and the police to help you instill order and reform the economic structure of our country so that our people will not die of hunger and will not starve. That's all we're asking. Mr. President, there is a constitutional provision, Article 12, Section 17 and 18, which mandates you, Mr. President, to declare a state of emergency and to take over the public utilities in this period of crisis. You are expected to take over from the control of your friends, the oligarchs, in order for you to bring down the punishing electricity rates and water rates that are being imposed on our people, among the highest in the whole world. You have not taken a single small step towards this, and instead you seem to have ignored this particular provision. The Filipino people know about this. It is impossible that you, the lawyer, does not know about this. It is your duty, Mr. President. Artikulo 12, Section 17, 18 hanggang 22 ay mga probisyon na katuon dito sa mga paglalapastangan ng buhay ng mga mamamayan, ng mga oligarko at kakontsaba ang mga nasa gobyerno. Ito po ang sigaw ng mamamayan sa darating na Sabado. June 12, dito po sa Menjola. Ang hingi po namin, araw ng kalayaan. Huwag niyo pong pipigilin ang mga mamamayang Pilipino na lalabas dyan papuntang Menjola at sa mga iba-iba pang lugar ng ating bansa upang mag-celebrate at magdeklara ng kanilang tunay na kalayaan. Napaka walang hiya naman ng mga nasa pamahalaan kung sa araw ng kalayaan tsaka pa pipigilin ang tao magpahiwatig ng kanilang kalayaan. So our appeal is you let us say our piece on June 12. We guarantee you that it will be peaceful. Despite the fact that many people are angry. They're so angry. They're almost, especially itong mga namamatay sa gutom, almost ready kumapit sa patalim. Pero kami po are giving you the assurance. We will be there. We will be noisy because we want to let you know what we feel and what needs to be done. Maraming salamat po.
Okay, so abangan nyo po, June 12. There will be announcements, of course, in the succeeding shows dito sa KDP channel, on Facebook and on our second, though we have a second channel on YouTube already. Nandun yung link po sa ating Facebook and here also. So, abangan nyo po yun because medyo, alam nyo na, freedom from speech is being suppressed globally. Because we are also fighting for freedom around the world, and many peoples are getting suppressed because the information that they want to come out, ito yung mga malalaking social media outlets, parang nagiging mainstream media na rin sila. So they're suppressing. So pero laban lang tayo. We have other channels. There are many means of communication po. Getting the right information out. So there will be more information coming out on June 12, on the June 12 event, and I hope some of you can join us then. So going back to our discussion, yung Independence Day, magandang ending na po yun sa ating discussion on Independence Day. As you can see, I wanted to add lang po, ang Constitution po natin protects the citizens from government. It's not the other way around. It does not protect government from the citizens. Our Constitution was designed precisely, just like the Constitution of the United States and any other sovereign nation state, that it will protect the citizens from government. Okay? So, everything you need there, Article 12, there's one on Article 3, yung human rights po, Section 4, the state cannot suppress or prevent freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, peaceful assembly, all of those po. So hindi po nawawalan ng legal basis for attending and asserting your rights. Because that's what independence, that's what a sovereign nation state really means. It means the right of the people, a government for, of, and by the people.
Ano yan, kakaiba po yan, tatandaan nyo, dito sa mga iba-ibang grupo na gumagamit ng ating saligang batas at ang ating mga batas
Right.
para protektahan ang kanilang sarili.
Right.
Bakit po? Kasi sila po ay may hawak na sandata. They have guns no, to attack our armed forces, to attack innocent people, to impose extortion activities no, on many businesses and on many people, and then they hide behind the Constitution. These are called the NPAs. No? We reject those types of people. No? They are just as bad as the corrupt members of our government. No? They destroy the very fiber of the Filipino nation.
Yes. That's but kaya maalala po natin, ang independence po hindi lang po freedom of speech. That's why si Chairman emphasized this, the State of the Union speech in 1941 ni Franklin Roosevelt. Essentially, that's what the Constitution is. That's the preamble. That's the general welfare. Freedom for worship, freedom of speech, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. Dapat po as a citizen of a free government, of a free nation, lahat po ng citizens dapat ganyan. And government does not work for itself. Government works for the people. That is the establishment of that. And if we cannot do that, if the current administration cannot do that, then we must look for people who can. And that's the duty of every citizen. You call yourself a Filipino, you love independence. It is a responsibility. That's what it is. It's hindi lang nandito po tayo, tapos bumoboto, tapos ganyan lang yan. Those freedoms, it comes with responsibilities and comes with duty. So yeah, that's the last word on the independence, and don't forget June 12. But
sayang po, meron pa na tayong konting panahon para mag-comment tayo dito kay dito tungkol kay Mussolini. Pero naubusan na yata tayo.
Yeah, how long is Mussolini's
meron pa ba yung
video?
Mussolini?
Ilan ba yung Mussolini? 6 minutes. Gusto mo?
Oh, sige. Kasi po etong si Mussolini, nung panahon nila Hitler sa Italy, nagkakontsaba yan, isa po siyang parang diktador, at nagkakontsaba yan sa mga mayayaman na korporasyon, no? Katulad ng mga mayayaman na pamilya. At itong pagsasama nila, dito nag-umpisa yung word na corporatism. Corporatism, na ang nagkaroon ng private-public partnership ang gobyerno tsaka itong mga at hinawakan nila ang buong ekonomiya ng Italy. At sa umpisa, ang kanilang pangako, gaganda ang buhay ng mga mamamayang na tao dahil dito sa private-public partnership. Tandaan nyo yung pinangako nitong si Noynoy noon.
Yes.
Nung inumpisahan niya yan, nagmumura na po ako no? Alam ko, papatayin niya yung taong Pilipino.
Right.
Pero hanggang ngayon, umiiral yung PPP na yan. No? Yan ang ginawa po ni Mussolini noon sa Italy. At umabot po ang galit ng tao sa kanila nung nagrevolusyon. Umabot na hanggang mapatayin nila si Mussolini. At pakita po natin ng
just a brief on what Mussolini was and his background, and then we will discuss a bit before we read the text. Okay, Joe.
You may have heard his name before, whether it be from a history textbook or a World War II documentary. This man is responsible for thousands of deaths and the payout of millions of dollars in war reparations. In this video, we delve into the rise and fall of this historic leader. So who was Benito Mussolini? Benito Almirger Andrea Mussolini was born in Predavio, Italy on July 29, 1883. Benito's father, Alessandro Mussolini, was a blacksmith by profession and a revolutionary socialist and nationalist sympathizer. As a result of Alessandro's strong political beliefs, he named his eldest son Benito after 3 leaders he admired. These leaders were Benito Juarez, the 26th president of Mexico, Amilcar Cipriani, an Italian revolutionary socialist, and Andrea Costa, who was also an Italian socialist. His father continued to project his political beliefs onto Benito, which overall had greatly influenced his early political career. In 1902, Benito moved to Switzerland in order to avoid serving in the military, and it was here when he began to study the ideas of Friedrich Nietzsche, Vilfredo Pareto, and George Sorel. He was arrested in 1903 for his involvement in a violent strike, which got him deported back to Italy. After returning back to Switzerland, he was arrested again in 1904 for falsifying his papers. Later that year, he returned to Italy to serve in the military for the next 2 years in exchange for being pardoned. Once Benito returned from service, he began writing for socialist newspapers, and after a few years, Benito became one of Italy's most prominent socialists. And by 1912, Benito was given the editorship of the Socialist Party newspaper, Avanti, which grew in circulation 5 times its original size under his leadership. By this time, Benito had rejected egalitarianism, which is a core principle of socialism. He instead favored Nietzsche's Übermensch concept, and this concept helped develop his anti-Slavic sentiments, as he viewed the Slavic people as inferior and barbaric. Benito's ideological drift from socialism led to his expulsion from the Italian Socialist Party in 1914. After being kicked out of the Socialist Party, Benito shifted his support from class warfare to revolutionary socialism. In addition to the works of Nietzsche, Pareto, and Sorel, Benito used Plato's The Republic as another ideological work to form fascism. In 1919, Benito announced a key component of his foreign policy, known as Spazio Vitale, which translates to vital space. This concept gave permission to conquer neighboring Sloven ethnic regions due to Slavs being less developed humans, which was seen as justified because Italy was overpopulated. From October 22nd to October 29th, 1922, about 30,000 fascist blackshirts marched on Rome to demand the formation of a new fascist government. On October 28th, King Victor Emmanuel III gave power to Benito to form a new government, and was appointed Prime Minister upon the resignation of Luigi Facta. As Prime Minister, his main objective was to establish a totalitarian state with himself being the supreme leader. He started by making any opposition disappear. On Christmas Eve 1925, a law passed that changed Benito's formal title to head of government. This law also changed the government into a de facto legal dictatorship, and this type of reform made Benito a target for a series of assassination attempts, all of which he survived. In Libya, Benito's fascist regime created policy that confiscated land from Libyans to be given to Italian colonists. His regime also started a genocide to kill as many Libyans as possible, starting in Cyrenaica, where over half the population was placed into 15 concentration camps by 1931. During this time, the Royal Italian Air Force began chemical warfare attacks against the Bedouin people. Aside from his evil antics, one economic policy known as the Battle for Wheat established 5,000 new farms and 5 new agricultural towns on the newly drained Pontine marshes, so that was beneficial. Once World War II began, Benito sided with the Axis powers. For a while, Italy enjoyed much success on the East African Campaign and in France, but this success had started to dwindle by early 1943, when the Axis powers were defeated in the Tunisian campaign, which kicked them out of North Africa, followed by the Allied invasion of Sicily and the frequent bombings in mainland Italy by the Allied forces. These bombings caused a shortage in raw materials and food, which turned Italian citizens against Benito. On July 25, 1943, Benito was removed from power by King Victor Emmanuel III and was arrested. But this is not the end of Mussolini. 2 months after his arrest, he was rescued by Nazi paratroopers. He then made an agreement with Hitler to set up a new regime known as the Italian Social Republic, which was nothing more than a Nazi puppet state. And it did not take long for his new regime to collapse. And Benito and his mistress tried to escape to Spain, but they were killed before they could, along with his regime officials. On April 29, 1945, the bodies of Mussolini and his fellow fascists were moved to Milan, where the Italian citizens shot, kicked, and spat on the rotting corpses. Then, the bodies were hung from a gas station and then stoned by his own people below. That is it for this video.
What was not said there, what was not emphasized, it gives you a sense of who this guy was. And much like Hitler in Germany, they read the same things, more or less, and they were very dictatorial in how they led here. But what was not said, what was not emphasized, was that when he was given power to run the state by in Italy, he had the backing of their local oligarchs. Ito yung mga nobles, ito yung mga landed, ito yung mga businessmen. Because he needed the money and the banks to support his war effort or to take over government. And he called that corporatism. And he said this is a new kind of thinking na government and corporatism is the merger that will help us all.
Look at that definition. Fascism should rightly be called corporatism, as it is the merger of corporate and government power. So this is what we have now, fascism, because there is a merger between corporations and government power here in the Philippines.
Right. So, sometimes nakikita po natin na yung mga government, they will go into PPP, what they call public-private partnerships. Eh, sino bang laman dyan? Sino bang lamang? Sinong magkakapera? You think as a businessman, mag-i-invest ka ba ng bilyones sa isang industry, tapos hindi ka kikita? On the other side, sasabihin mo, basta may kontrata ka, pwede ka nang umiram ng pera, tapos siya na yung babayan. So, kikita ka pa rin.
Yung fascism po, no, is focused not on the welfare of the people. The people are just victims. No? They're there, but the welfare and the improvement of their quality of life is not the objective, right, of fascism. Yung sa kanila, paano mong aayusin ang mga coffers ng gobyerno.
Right.
At siyempre, sa kanila lang, no? Kanya yung corporatism tsaka government is a unholy conspiracy or partnership na ang tawag dyan, rightfully, fascism.
Yes, and you remember po, lahat ng pinag-aralin Mussolini, Nietzsche, all of these philosophers, and then he comes out, he was a socialist, he was, because Nietzsche, nagiging Marxist na rin siya. All of these socialism, communism, and fascism, they do not celebrate the sovereign individual. It's always the collective state. It's always the state. Now you exist for the state. And you are a worker, diyan ka, because you're giving your life and your work, and you should be happy for the state. And then the state will provide for you. Very different.
Ang nangyari po nun, para hindi masyadong klaro ng storya nila na nasa lumabas sa clip. Yung, siyempre, kung hindi nakatuon sa kapakanan ng taong bayan ang pagme-merge ng corporatism tsaka gobyerno, no? Kung hindi aayusin ang buhay ng tao, malulugbok sila sa kahirapan. At dito nga nangyari, dito sa sa Italy.
Yeah.
Nagkaroon sila ng parang revolusyon na nga, no? At napatay si Mussolini tsaka yung kanyang girlfriend o asawa.
After the war.
At pagkatapos nun, yung sa galit ng tao, yung kanilang mga bangkay ibinitay sa isang lugar. At lahat ng mga tao dumadaan, dinuduraan siya at tinatapunan ng bato. No? Patay na.
Yeah.
Pero ganyan po ang kanyang nasapit, sinapit na ending.
Right. Kasi yun yung kasi siya yung sabi niya, itong gagawin natin sa Italy, mag-i-invade tayo, we will conquer Europe, we will conquer the lesser races, sama kayo sa amin, tapos magiging glorious yung ating victory. Nung nagkagera, lumabas pala tapos binobomba ng US at other nations yung Italy kasi gera nga. Nagugutom na yung tao. So parang galit na galit sila dito, parang niloko niya ang taong bayan.
Yeah.
But what he did is the same thing Hitler did, na yung pagsasama ng bankero and oligarchs to bankroll his invasion of Europe. It's the same. And they will say Nazism, fascism, communism, socialism, basta lahat ng ism na yan na hindi ine-emphasize yung sovereign na tao. Yan ang
So, ang biktima ng taong bayan, kanya, kasi Hitler or this, lahat po hanggang ngayon, pati ngayon, kanya po namin linalabas ito. Para maintindihan nyo po kung ano yung ginagawa ng gobyerno natin. Nagkakaroon nga ng public-private partnership. At ang kanilang tinututukan ay hindi kapakanan ng taong bayan. Yung mga economic managers natin, yung mga nasa gobyerno, at yan din mga nasa korporasyon, mga oligarko, no? Alam nila kung ano yung ginagawa nila. No? Ang taong bayan, hindi pa alam. Kaya ipinapahayag po namin sa inyo na this is a fascist government that we are under. No?
Okay. So yan, so I hope we talked about independence. Siyempre, we will keep talking about the concept of independence forever, no? Hanggang nandito tayo. Because that's who we are. We are patriots. Any patriot who doesn't love independence is not a patriot, really. Because that's what the Philippines is. It's an idea of sovereignty.
It's time to read.
Yes.
Ngayon, by the way, alam niyo po, meron mga nagte-text sa atin kung pwede i-take up daw itong mga emails ni Fauci.
Fauci.
Marami po kaming binabasa at pasalukuyang pinapag-aralan po namin dahil napakarami po.
Yeah.
No?
Yeah.
At chine-check po namin yung veracity dahil hindi po namin alam kung talagang emails yun o kaya kung ano ba ang ibig sabihin nitong mga ito kasi nangyayari ito sa mga communication nila sa Amerika.
Right.
So we have to study it well in order to be able to explain it also better to our listeners.
Yeah.
But don't worry, Fauci is not gonna go and probably go to jail very soon. No?
Yeah. And we will explain it once we get a grasp on it.
But the more important and immediate thing is June 12, ito pong darating na Sabado, magkita-kita po tayo sa Menjola. Kami po ay magkakaroon ng Zoom for that day at ilalabas po natin yung link para sa lahat ng gustong kumonect dito sa atin sa Zoom at kung gustong malaman kung anong nangyayari sa Menjola at iba-iba pang lugar ng bansa natin kung saan nagse-celebrate sila ng Araw ng Kalayaan. No? So we will be the control dito po sa KDP.
Ay, media.
Tayo ang pinaka-media dahil sigurado hindi lalabas do sa mainstream media.
We are the media. Okay, let's read our text messages and comments tonight. Again, This does not necessarily reflect those of the KDP or the station, but in the interest of free speech, we will read all of them as is. Marisa Niegos, good evening po, Sir Ito, Sir Butch. Elizabeth Rosete, thank you for that eye-opener. Alfredo Ching, dapat na po talaga magkaisa ang labanan sistemang ginagawa dito sa ating bansa ng mga makapangyarihang tao. Angeline Nievera, good evening, Sir Ito, Sir Butch, listening here from Hong Kong. Out Richard, good evening po. Elizabeth Mortel, good evening din sa inyo, Sir Ito, Sir Butch. Wala na nga tayong freedom kasi gusto ng gobyerno maturukan agad ng mga tao ng vaccine. Bederio Candido Joselito, magandang gabi po sa inyo, Sir Butch, Sir Ito. Mabuhay po kayo. Watching from Riyadh, KSA. Okay, I cannot pronounce your name. Good evening po sa inyo, watching from Youth Sama Bajau United Group Basilan Chapter. Wow, nice to see you. Mabuhay po kayo, mabuhay ang Katipunan. Alright. Nilo Formentera, binubulag ang mga mamamayan sa build. Hussein?
Yeah.
Albi Arpa. Greetings of peace and solidarity from Samabajao United Group, Inc. Sugi leaders in Zamboanga Peninsula, Region 9. Wow.
Magandang gabi po sa inyo lahat, kayo na nasa Mindanao.
Yes.
Nababalitaan po namin na nakikinig kayo at nanonood. Thank you very much at sana isiwalat natin lahat ng napapag-usapan natin dito. Kayo din naman sa mga sa Cebu, marami pong kaibigan tayo sa Cebu specifically at nagkakaroon po sila ng organization para sa KDP dyan sa Cebu.
Yan.
Okay.
Philemon De Vera, good evening, Sir Butch and Itos Valdes, watching from Muntinlupa City. Elizabeth De Los Reyes Gutierrez, magandang gabi, Sir Butch and Sir Itos. Mabuhay ang KDP. Gloria Siebert, guten Abend sa inyo, Sir Butch, Sir Itos, always watching from Germany. Mabuhay po kayo, God bless. Angeline Leasing, good evening, Sir Butch, Sir Itos, listening here in Hong Kong. Thanks, nakabalik na po kayo sa YouTube. Keep safe and God bless. That's very, very true, sir. All of this is because of corruption. Lahat sila kampo ng mga oligarko. From the lowest to the highest na nakaupo. Lahat mga ganid. Zenea Arcilia, good evening, Sir Butch, Sir Itos, listening here in Hong Kong. God bless you both. Iligan, Isabela, Philippines. Sa wakas, nabuhayan kami uli ng pag-asa. Salamat, sirs. Nakabalik uli kayo. I guess sa YouTube. Mga sir, hanggang nandyan ang lahat ng mga ganit na oligarko sa ating bansa. Hindi mabubuwag yan. Toto Ascares, good evening po mga ating mga katipunan, Sir Butch, Sir Itos, at sa mga viewers at listeners niyo po. Out Richard, naging pabigat sa buong Pilipinas ang opisyal ng gobyerno. Nagkamali ata akong binoto. Pinagsisisihan ko lahat ng palpak na pagboto sa mga taong kampon ng mga demonyo. Inaaniban na grupo ng nakaupo sa gobyerno. Rain. Si Fauci, nagsisinungaling tungkol sa HCQ at epektibo ito sa publiko noong 2020 pero binaliwala. Correct. May nabasa ako tungkol about admin ni Rojas during Liberation na si Ferdinand Marcos, ang economic manager noong panahon na yan, at siya ang nagplano ng mga proyekto sa buong Pilipinas, including BNPP, dams, water irrigation, bridges, schools, at hospitals.
Hindi po.
I don't think, yeah.
Wala pa noon si Ferdinand E. Marcos. Ferdinand E. Marcos, I think, became a congressman in 1954.
Yes.
1954.
Yes.
Bago po yun, ang balita po namin na he was a practicing lawyer. No? And before that, he was a soldier.
Yes.
No? During the war, he was a soldier.
Right. So Rojas was right after the war.
Mm-hmm.
Alfredo Redina, present. Another patriot to be considered is Macario Sakay, who was very angry with Americans.
Tama.
The last versus USA declared as a rebel. Yes. Cesar Asar. Cesar Asar. Chong mamamayan lang ang lumikha ng hinahalal natin sila para maglingkod, pero ang lumalabas sa kanila ay gobyerno. It's a puwera na ang taong bayan at balak pa rin tayong patayin sa pamamagitan ng bakuna. Ano susunod na lang lamang ba tayo? Bayan, kayo na ang humatol. Marisa Buya, watching from Hong Kong. Carlo EY, things we learned today from Fauci leaked emails. Yan si Carlo.
Yeah.
Number 1, COVID was created. Number 2, hydroxychloroquine is a drug that will cure COVID. Number 3, there's no such thing as asymptomatic spread. O, nakita ko rin yun. Face masks do not work. Number 5, no lockdowns were necessary. Lockdowns were not necessary. 6, Mark Zuckerberg contacted Fauci to offer Facebook, Instagram as censorship center for federal government. Number 7, we were not given actual numbers of those who died as a result of COVID. Number 8, Fauci knowingly lied to Congress last month. I'm just going to leave this right here. So there are links that he put there from Daily Wire, Document Cloud. Marami po. Keep reading po. Tapos next time, discuss po natin.
Thank you, Carlo.
Yeah. Nilo Formentera. Salamat po pagbasa ng ating komento. Nakikinig rin po ako sa radyo from Novaliches. John Cyril Onato. Good evening, Sir Butch, and the people here. It's good to see you again, mga sirs. Parang gusto nila yung YouTube, no? Anyway, keep it up and God bless you sa inyo. Watching from Capiz. Ngayon, mga sirs, hindi tayo angat kasi yung mga oligarko nandyan sa gobyerno. Nangungurakot kaya hindi umaasenso ang bansa dahil sa kanila. At itong PRRD, hinahayaan niya sakupin ang mga oligarko. Grabe, traidor talaga si Benigno Aquino. No wonder naghihirap ang bansa dahil sa paggagago ginawa nilang mga oligarko. Mga sir, saludo ako sa great-grandfather ninyo na si Pedro Abad Santos at Jose Abad Santos. Sila ang bayani.
Salamat po.
Sir Hezarde Alonto. Good evening mga katiponeros, father and son. Sila ang Amerikanong buhaya at mga killers, pasista. Jeffrey Dizon, good PM mga katipon. We're watching, listening always here at Taguig City. Thank you, Jeffrey. Rose Riolada. Good evening po mga sirs. May information po na pinapakalat Alpha Omega na matagal na may deposits ang Pilipinas sa iba't ibang bansa at nagre-release ng billions dollars as interest since 1957 at nang matured ng 2005 kaya daming pera ng government at actually yung build ay bayad na lahat sa laki ng kinolect even UNAM connection ng SLEX but NLEX ay bayad na po. More power po sa Katipunan Demokratikong Philippine.
Thank you.
Lourdes Nakajima, walang hiya talaga lahi ni Aquino. Ginamit kasi ng mga doc sa agenda nila, kala nila nagmamalasakit ang gobyerno sa bawat isa. Iron Rock Jermis, Marcos Loyalist, Hong Kong, watching and supporting you guys. Good evening mga Katipuneros. Axboy Lifestyles, bakit wala na pong kinaksuhan ng treason, Sir Butch? Diba ang treason ang ginagawa pagbenta ng China ng tobacco? Gloria Macapagal, Adnoy at Traidor Terte. Wala na po bang konstitusyon ng kaso ang treason? Yun na nga. Dulce Awakay. Gandang gabi mga katiponeros from Marcos Loyalist Hong Kong. Chris Cruz. Magandang gabi sa lahat ng ating mga katipon. Ray Isagire. During Great Recession, FDR gumawa ng 4 na mahalagang batas. SSS, Unemployment Compensation, 15 million federal job, retirement disbursement. Truman pro-capitalist. Estrada Joseph, mabuhay po sa inyo. Angelo Solano, good evening po mga sir. It's nice to be back on YouTube. Ang law, pinapairal ng mga lupong conspiring each other is satanic law. Only the wrath of God can burn them with fire and brimstone in hell. Isay Ariel, good evening Sir Butch Itos. I can imagine how proud you are to be a relative of Sir Pedro Abad Santos. Being patriotic is in your blood. No wonder ganyan na lang ang malasakit niyo sa bayan. Ganyan na lang ang malasakit niyo sa bayan. God bless niyo po. Sana dumami pa ang lahi niyo.
Salamat po.
Thank you. Glenn Buwan, wag din natin kalimutan ang freedom of choice. Yes, of course. Rog Almazor, good evening po mga sirs. Mabuhay po kayo at salamat sa pagbibigay ng kaliwanagan at tinatawag nating kalayaan. Sa aking paniniwala, ay wala tayong tunay na kalayaan sapagkat pinamumunuan tayo ng mga taong sunod-sunuran sa mga oligarkong kumokontrol sa ating ekonomiya. Mabuhay ang KDP. Teresita De Leon, mabuhay po kayong mga sir. Sana mo malaman ng mga kabataan ng ating history para sumapuso nila ang pagiging makabayan, lalo na po ngayon na parang mag-uumpisa po tayong muli dahil sa pagbabalik ni Trump ng sistema pinapatupad ay yung Parisi ni President Franklin Roosevelt. Tama, Teresita, I agree with you. Dolly Buaya Delaney, I don't know what this man is talking about. Rap XB, sunod-sunod na ang paglalapastangan sa atin. Hybrid election, Smartmatic, dismissal of Leonen impeachment, emboldened public utility scam, etc. Karapatan natin para bawiin ang bansa natin.
That's right.
Correct. Mark Sibulo, pasista na talaga si P. Dutz. Malchora Aquino, sumama na po sa June 12, araw ng kalayaan. We will announce sa Gising Maharlika page, KDP page, at iba pa. Okay. Glenn Buwan, as what the guest of Katote yesterday said in his program, the President and IATF have already violated the Constitution, as well as local government code. Therefore, they should now be put on judicial notice and legally restrained for enforcing directives violative of our rights.
That's right.
Makes sense. Johnny Ventosa, thank you. The people have to be aware of our individual national sense of sovereignty. The government has no right to stop the people from expressing their divine rights.
Yeah.
Right. Alain Pallones, kasama niyo ako dyan, Prof. Butch and Kaito sa Araw ng Kalayaan. Mga Katipunan, mabuhay po kayong lahat. Santa Mesa, Manila. Ramoncito Villamor, Sir Butch, tumakbo na kayo ni Gwen Garcia at si Marcoleta at Defensor. Tumakbo na kayo for President and Vice President with Gwen Garcia. Ito talaga ang kailangan ngayon ng bayan. Lahat ng politiko natin ngayon nasa gobyerno ay puro idiot at bobo. Time to trash them all. Dapat sa mga yan ay litisin para makulong silang lahat. Sana nga. Dora Vega, good evening po mga sirs. Mabuhay po kayong nakabalik sa live streaming. Bernardo Tensuan, wala pong namamatay sa gutom na Pilipino. Virginia,
Ulit yun.
wala pong namamatay sa gutom na Pilipino. Hindi ko alam.
Nakakagulat. Hindi ko alam kung paano mong sasabihin yun. No?
Or what you meant.
Kung ano ibig mong sabihin. Dahil nakakasiguro po tayo, maski na hindi natin nakikita yung mga yan.
Yeah.
Marami pong namamatay sa gutom. Alam niyo po ang gutom, may epekto yan sa kalusugan, hindi po ba? Kung hindi kayo kakain and you start starving, no? Tatamaan na po kayo ng iba-ibang mga sakit. Tatamaan po ang kalusugan nyo. At iba-ibang paraan kung paano kang mamamatay. Pwede ka talagang mamatay sa gutom, no?
Yes.
Pwede ka rin mamatay sa sakit na naumpisahan dahil sa gutom. Walang sustansya ang katawan mo, magkakasakit ka at mamamatay. Marami po yan. Marami po yan.
Okay. Virginia Malonzo, good evening po sa inyong lahat. Mabuhay po. Watching from Pasig. Ang mga tao takot sa gobyerno kaysa sa virus. Palagi ko yun na nga.
Freedom from fear.
Yes. Crisel Solis, watching from Canada. Always mabuhay kayo, KDP. Eric Bautista, watching. God bless. I Tinig Oti, watching from Tokyo. And that's it. Okay. You wanna plug June 12?
Yeah, gusto ko lang paalala ulit ang June 12, no? Abangan nyo po, ipopost po natin ang ating Zoom meeting ID tsaka passcode, no? Para makasali po kayo. We will open this up. Pasensyano lang kung hindi kayo makasali lahat, pero mapapakinggan nyo po at marami po kami mga video ilalabas doon. No? Kami po nila Jet Gonzales, ako, at iba pa dito magmo-monitor at magbabato ng mga news, mga
updates
tungkol dito sa mangyayari on June 12.
and interviews, gano'n, diba?
Ang hiling ko po sa mga iba-ibang organisasyon, kayo pong mga iba-ibang meron mga organisasyon kayo, kung ano man ang inyong karaingan, no? Gumawa lang po kayo ng maliit na o one-page na deklarasyon. Ang sinasabi kung ano ang inyong organisasyon, tiga saan po kayo, ano ang inyong paninindigan, at ano ang inyong karaingan, no? At papayagan namin po kayong basahin ito sa Zoom, via Zoom, para mapakinggan po ng buong bayan, no? At mapakilala din ang inyong organisasyon sa lahat, no? So I ask you, organizations here in the Philippines, in the different islands in the Philippines, Luzon, Visayas, Mindanao, different regions, if you have organizations of ethnic organizations like Muslims and maggawa po kayo, no? Gusto nyong federalization, gusto nyong barahin ng bakuna, o kung ano man gusto nyo sabihin nyo na. Kayo din mga nasa OFWs from Hong Kong, from Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, from Germany, from Canada. If you have an organization there and you want to be able to say your piece and declare together with us the principles of freedom, araw ng ating kalayaan, o makiisa kayo sa araw ng kalayaan, pahiwatig nyo rin po, no? Ilabas natin para mababasa natin on June 12. We start at about 1 o'clock. We will try to start earlier, but we start at 1 o'clock in the afternoon and all the way up to about 6 o'clock in the evening, no? So hanggang yan po ang ating plano. We don't know exactly how many people are going to go. Pero kami nananawagan sa lahat ng mga patriotikong Pilipino. Ngayon na lang po ang ating pagkakataon na makiisa sa isa't isang mga Pilipino. Ngayon na lang ang ating pagkakataon ipahiwatig sa ating pamahalaan na nakikiisa o nagkakaisa ang ating mga mamamayan sa paglabas ng kanilang mga karaingan. This is the only time, probably the last time we will have to get together and go to the streets and show that kalayaan means something to us. This is the only time that we will fight for our freedom. Often, we just take freedom for granted. Parang malaya tayo. Pero sa katotohanan, hindi tayo malaya. Pag uusisain natin ang iba-ibang ng ating buhay, no, we realize we are not free. So sana, through KDP and through Gising Maharlika and all the other organizations we're in, RDRG and so on and so forth, no, magkaisa po tayo at ipalabas natin sa ating mga mamamayan at sa ating pamahalaan what freedom really means. Hanggang sa June 12, kita-kita po tayo.
May mga so we have our regular shows Tuesday, Thursdays, and Fridays, right?
Yes.
Dito tayo sa Cave. So we will, abangan niyo po yun with Talakayang Bayan, with Toti and RJ, and of course our chairman. So we will have more news and updates as palapit na yung June 12. Okay, extra.
Okay. Yung music niya nakalimutan niya. Okay, sa ngalan po ng ating mga katipon dito sa ating Katipunan at sa magagaling na staff ng DZXL Radio Mo Nationwide. Kami po ay pansamantalang nagpapaalam at nagpapasalamat na sinamahan niyo kami ngayon, ang oral de peligro ng ating bayan at ng buong mundo dito po sa ating Katipunan. Hanggang sa linggo po muli mga katipon, 7 to 9 p.m. Magandang gabi po sa inyong lahat.